So welcome to the Closer Look feature. As a part of our global hotspot briefing for the 15th of March, 2023, we have been going through a series on China in Latin America. Part one was an overall look. Part two was specifically focused on Brazil, and part three, as you can see here in the agenda, is specifically focused on both Colombia and Argentina. These two countries are very different in their approach to China, and I look forward to digging into that. But let's start with Colombia, shall we? Um, Colombia, overall relations between China and Colombia is where we'll start, as we usually do. I would describe this as a limited relationship. Colombia has always been, at least the last couple of decades, has been a significant partner of the United States. Colombia and the U.S. have a strong military to military partnership. They have a close relationship when it comes to the military arms sales back and forth between the two nations, or really U.S. to Colombia, but you get the point. So Colombia is also a major non-NATO ally as of March 2022, is when President Biden announced that he would designate them as such. The Congress then has to formally apply that designation, but there are really no barriers to that. So major non-NATO ally, more or less, to the U.S. with a strong military to military partnership. So Colombia actually has a lot to lose by pursuing a direct relationship with China, especially militarily. Right now, Colombia is certainly closer to the U.S. than China, and part of that is they are not a signatory on China's Belt and Road. They prefer to maintain access to the U.S. defense industry and exercises and trainings and equipment and that type of thing. And so because of that, they have not engaged China with the Belt and Road. Now, political considerations, always very important in circumstances like this. President Petro has appointed pro-China officials. So you see the two gentlemen listed there. Cabrera is Colombia's ambassador to China. He is actually a well-known film director who grew up in China with communist parents during the revolutionary era. He attended Beijing University, which is a very respected institution among the PRC, and then came back and joined guerrilla forces in Colombia for a while, and then went back to China to start his film career. So the Chinese, he's essentially owned by the Chinese, more or less. They trust him. They trust that he is doing their work, that kind of thing, and he probably is. So he's Colombia's ambassador to China, a very, very pro-China individual. And then you have Leva as the foreign minister. And Leva is in a fairly similar position. He didn't necessarily live there, but he has been heavily involved in peace negotiations with leftist terrorist groups such as FARC and things of that nature. His ideology, though, is very oriented towards China. He is likely to be able to deepen the Colombia-Chinese relationship. So these are the two gentlemen who have the most contact with China, who President Petro has appointed, and they are going to do everything they can to draw Colombia closer to China. Also, though, with an eye to all the benefits from the U.S. that Colombia currently enjoys. China loves these developments as you would expect them to. They've publicly approved of the Petro administration, even though there's no real defense agreements or coordination. There are still significant economic considerations. So let's take a look at those. Commerce between China and Colombia has expanded 35 times since 2001. Now, it is leveled since 2014. There was an explosion in trade between the two countries in the 2005 to 2010 era. But then in 2014, it actually leveled and is down from the, say, 2010, 2011 era. There are a lot of China-based companies in Colombia. There's at least 100, as you see there. Some of the most significant ones would be Emerald. They are a oil and natural gas company. They have significant petroleum operations in the guerrilla-dominated areas of Colombia, the north area, and then also swinging around to the west. Emerald has actually had a lot of issues with illegal armed groups, including kidnappings and destruction of equipment and things of that nature. But they're a huge oil company and they do operate extensively inside of Colombia. The second one is Zinjan. They're a mining company. They operate gold mines and things of that nature. They're actually a major employer in Colombia because of the extent of their mines. However, again, same type of thing. They do run into issues with the indigenous populations. They run into issues with the illegal gangs and other groups who are competing with them with their own illegal mining operations. If you've been reading our report the last couple of weeks, you'll note that, and we've said this twice in our report, that the second greatest source of income for these Colombian gangs and such is illegal mining. So Emerald Energy, not so much a direct competitor, but Zinjan absolutely is. So they've had a lot of issues with that. And then, of course, Huawei. Huawei's operated in the Colombian market for over 15 years. They are dominant when it comes to the sale of telecommunication devices, especially when you consider that there is not a ton of competition. They have more or less killed off most of the competition in Colombia, and they also are a major provider of mobile hotspots so that the population can get good internet. And so what you've got is a lot of Chinese companies operating in Colombia, even if you don't have necessarily formal high-level agreements between the Colombian government and the Chinese government. Still, these companies are allowed to move in and operate in Colombia essentially just on a free market basis, more or less. There also are major infrastructure projects, probably the most visible area of Chinese expanding presence in Colombia. But again, also a lot of issues there. You've seen a lot of false starts. There have been canals, bridges, hydroelectric facilities, dams, all of these things where they've started and then various things ranging from indigenous protests to corruption to bribery, et cetera, et cetera. All these allegations come out, and all this action is taken against a lot of that development that that they end up not happening at all. So there is certainly economic connections there, but they aren't nearly as significant as you see in a lot of other Latin American countries. Economic considerations continue. These are Colombia's top exports to China. These are the top 10. Similar to what we talked about last week when we went through Brazil, these are essentially, more or less anyway, all commodities. So commodities, agricultural products are the things being mined out of Colombia, sent from Colombia to China. And then if we jump to the next slide, China exports to Colombia, this is very similar as well to what you see in other Latin American countries. They're exporting back electronics and electrical equipment. They're sending back vehicles, they're sending back pharmaceuticals, things, manufactured things, essentially. And when you look at the numbers here, right, you've got essentially the top three items all over $1 billion, and iron and steel is pretty close. When you jump back to Colombia exports to China, you've got $3 billion in mineral fuels, oils distillation, and then it drops dramatically all the way down to 258 million for iron and steel back to China exports to Colombia. That's not the case here. So there is a significant trade deficit here between Colombia and China. One of the things I want to note as well is media influence efforts. So this is from Freedom House. This is their ranking. They say that Colombia is very resilient and that Beijing's media influence efforts are low, with quite a bit of resistance among the population. So very interesting, I think, to bring this in, is that Beijing is attempting to influence Colombia and the people in Colombia at a fairly low level, a score of 29 out of 85. It's almost as if there is an easier route to Latin America resources and commodities, and indeed there are in other countries. And so they're pursuing those other routes as opposed to putting too much energy into Colombia based upon Colombia's very close ties with the United States. So it's certainly an interesting angle there. And I think that this holds true across all sectors, really, when it comes to China and Colombia, that the Chinese are simply not putting forth as much effort into Colombia just based upon degree of difficulty as they are many other countries. So let's think about some future considerations here. So we established earlier on the current political leadership is certainly drawing nearer to China. They certainly have a pro-China bent to them, if you want to call it that. And that's likely to continue. I don't see any real indicators that the leadership in Colombia is likely to turn away from China anytime soon. But the primary consideration in Colombia also is to maintain their status with the United States. They're cautious about China because they have no desire to harm their relationship with the United States. So a lot of this does come down to, does the United States want to fully implement future deals with Colombia? Does the United States, are we interested in the United States maintaining close ties with Colombia? And if we are, Colombia is likely to acquiesce to, at least in our opinion here at Knightsbridge. It does appear that Colombia is going to try to play both sides, but remain primarily focused northward towards the United States as opposed to looking across the Pacific. Now, moving to the section on Argentina. I would say that the situation in Argentina, between Argentina and China, is quite different than that of Colombia, and you'll see why. So Argentina is a member of Belt and Road in 2022. They have also applied to be a formal member of the BRICS alliance that is essentially dominated by China, more or less anyway. And they are very close to China. There have been some political issues, but leadership, Argentina as a whole, is very much in China's orbit, as opposed to Colombia, which we just reviewed, which is not. So Argentina is a close trading partner with China, and they're also involved in other things that we'll get to here in a moment. So let's talk about some of those political considerations and political issues. The political cooperation can best be described as varied. There have been a lot of starts and stops and things of that nature, mostly on the side of Argentina. President Fernandez has made a lot of promises to China that have yet to become reality. He went to Beijing in February 2022, which is when they joined Belt and Road, signed a lot of documents that essentially said, top line are worth $23 billion with China. But a lot of those projects, when you start digging in, they're not new. Some of those are actually ongoing. And what he signed was just a reauthorization of old projects. And they've been dragging on for a long time. There's also a lot of issues politically because Argentina has a long history of failing to follow through on previously agreed upon projects, which has frustrated China. The big one would be the Atusha 3 nuclear power plant, which was something that China was going to finance back in 2014. That essentially fell apart, not the plant itself, of course, but the deal. And there's so many other instances where infrastructure projects have simply not happened. Bridges, gas pipelines, a thermoelectric plant, the logistics center, dredging projects, et cetera, high voltage energy connections, railroad construction, things of that nature that have all been promised by Argentina and even deals signed. And then when it comes time to actually get going on the project, Argentina stalls, drags its feet, and then China kind of gives up in disgust. Despite that, though, top line officials in Argentina and China are very friendly with each other and have determined that they want to move closer together outside of those frustrations, and really in spite of those political frustrations. There are quite a few arms sales between Argentina and China. They actually have a defense cooperation agreement Not that they're true allies, but they do have a cooperation agreement. Argentina has either purchased or has announced that they will purchase APCs, fighter jets, patrol ships, heavy equipment from China, and things of that nature. Also, they've authorized the construction of a satellite tracking facility there in Argentina, etc. So there's quite a lot of military cooperation, especially when it comes to arms sales between these two countries. I would add that the economic considerations, though, are a big part of that. Mentioned before, Argentina has joined Belt and Road and has applied for BRICS membership. Now, Beijing has come out and said that they do approve Argentina's application into BRICS, that they will support it. And essentially within BRICS, if China does not approve, you do not get in. So the biggest hurdle for approval, first and foremost, is being approved by China, and they do approve of that. So China essentially sees the political issues within Argentina as something that they can deal with, something they can handle, and that the risk is worth the reward. Soybeans are 64% of Argentina's farmable land, and a lot of that is because China more or less buys them all. They simply do. They just snatch up soybeans from Argentina, more or less 100% of the crop, depending on the year. And Argentina is very, very happy to continue to convert farmable land to soybeans purely for exports to China. So that is a big piece of the picture. And then you see that next bullet point, China's industrial exports represent 98.9% of Argentina's imports. This isn't all imports, these are industrial. So you're thinking of heavy equipment and machinery and things of that nature. Argentina's industrial imports are absolutely dominated by China. So as further evidence of their closeness when it comes to their economies. Argentina, one downside is that Argentina's inflation rate is currently 100%. It just recently hit 100% top line inflation. And so that's certainly puts a little bit of cold water on the situation when their currency is not worth quite so much, but they are willing to work with Chinese currency as well, at least to a certain extent. So that's alleviated some of those concerns from China's part on inflation. And then, of course, any consideration of China, Argentina, and economies in general in that region have to address the lithium triangle. Here's a graphic showing the lithium triangle in Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina. It contains 60% of the world's lithium, which is a must-use mineral in much high technology, in batteries, in some control panels. Every fighter jet has a lot of lithium in it. So anything that's high tech probably involves lithium. And Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile control 60% of it. So a lot of Chinese investment in these three countries, but specifically in Argentina, which is what we're talking about today, is focused on mining, is focused on these salt flats and things of that nature to acquire lithium specifically. You can see there that Argentina has 19 megatons, which is just under Bolivia, but well ahead of Chile. However, Chile's is the easiest to get to. The barrier to entry is much, much lower. Bolivia's is very difficult to get to. So right now, a lot of Chinese investment is heavily focused on Chile when it comes to lithium. However, Argentina is next up, and they have a lot more lithium than Chile does, as you can see there from that data point. So Argentina's lithium status is a big, big deal to China, and something that China is heavily focused on as they refine over 60% of the world's lithium. Other economic considerations, because it's not just all about lithium, obviously, but this is a good overall graphic. You can see the sources there at the bottom for the graphic. And China's interest in Argentina's infrastructure, energy, and mining sectors. So down at the bottom there, you see the project financing for infrastructure, quite significant. You see the FDI from China there as well is pretty significant. This is where China's areas of focus are. Metals is certainly something that they're very, very interested in moving into the future. Although Argentina's industry, when it comes to metals, needs a lot of refinement. So that's one of the reasons that a lot of it's going there. And then, of course, trade deficit there on the right-hand side that we've been talking about. Looking at Argentina's exports to China, these are the top 10. So soybeans, there's your top one right there. Soybeans fall under that top category at 1.97 billion. A lot of also beef and poultry related products for there, meat and edible meat offal. Coming in second, then it goes down to cereals, etc. So Argentina does produce quite a lot of agricultural products that export to China. That's a big deal. A lot of the lithium mining, a lot of the metals, those are things that are in development right now, and Argentina certainly has a lot of potential there, but that's really not where the money is at the moment when it comes to exports. The real money is exporting of these items you see here, primarily organic commodities, and by organic I mean meats and cereals and things like that, not the USDA certified organic. So that's where things stand right now from Argentina going to China. Over the years, this is probably going to look very, very different as all of those investments in mining and specifically in lithium in Argentina by China start to bear some fruit. But that's what you're looking at right now. And then this is almost at this point a generic chart of China exports to almost any Latin American nation. Electrical equipment, machinery, vehicles, pharmaceuticals, etc., manufactured goods go back. So again, all of Latin America, really, it's commodities to China, manufactured goods back to Argentina, and a massive trade deficit. Just over and over again, a recurring theme. China is literally sucking up all of the resources out of Latin America that they possibly can in any possible country that is willing to work with them and that can supply. Wanted to show this media influence chart as well, like we did for Colombia. This chart shows that Argentina is vulnerable, whereas Colombia, if you remember, was resilient. Argentina is showing as vulnerable per Freedom House anyway. Beijing's media influence efforts are much higher in Argentina, and local resilience, as opposed to being strong, is notable, which is a lesser ranking in Freedom House's system there. So Beijing does put significant resources towards influencing the politicians and the people of Argentina publicly, much more so than they do a lot of other countries in Latin America. They clearly see into the future the mining, specifically the lithium mining sector, as being very important. They see that there is potential there. They see that the government officials are likely to allow that type of thing. And so it's worth it to them, based upon especially the lithium looking to the future, to put forth significant media influence efforts. So certainly something very interesting there for you. Future considerations. Argentina moving strongly into China's orbit. Despite all the issues, right? Despite their lousy and unclear foreign policy, despite the misfires on infrastructure projects, despite the political issues that have been in the past, despite their 100% inflation rate, despite all of these things, despite their underdeveloped mining, especially in lithium, all of these issues to the side, Argentina and China are both heavily invested and interested in each other's future and continuing to work with each other on a fairly grand scale. Lithium and soybeans are key. Soybeans are key today. Lithium is key tomorrow. So we would certainly expect Argentina to continue to move closer and closer to China. If they do gain formal entry into the BRICS economic bloc, that would just seal the deal, more or less. And again, both countries are extremely interested in seeing that through. So with that, I will conclude. I don't see any questions that have come in. So thank you for watching the Global Hotspot Briefing for 15th of March 2023. Thank you so much for subscribing. We truly do appreciate that. And we hope that our efforts among our collectors and our analysts and our team is beneficial to you and provides you some excellent situational awareness. So once again, we thank you very much. Always open to suggestions, comments, questions. Just respond to any Knightsbridge email, and we will be happy to do that. Thank you much. Have a great day.